is much bigger than the action. If the action could begin to match the rhetoric, that would be a good thing, and that's really why we're marching today, to give people an opportunity to express their concern about the gravity of the crisis we face. I think it's the biggest crisis we've faced since the Second World War, probably bigger.
Demonstrations are taking place across the UK to pressurise politicians to take action on climate change. The rallies are timed to coincide with the UN climate change talks in Bali. Parallel marches are also being staged in 50 other countries. Our reporter James Kelly is in Grosvenor Square in central London, where the demonstrators are heading now. James, does it look as if the demonstrators believe that Gordon Brown's going a bit soft on climate change?
Well, as you can see, it's a thoroughly miserable day here in Grosvenor Square, Peter, but at the moment the demonstrators are down the road and they're going to be handing in a letter to Downing Street, which will be calling on Gordon Brown to toughen up his proposed climate change bill. Now, that climate change bill does commit the UK to a 60% reduction in carbon emissions by 2050, but they want it to go further still. They want to see that increase to 80%. They want aviation and shipping to be included in that bill, and they also want biofuels to be ruled out as one of the options for reducing carbon dioxide emissions. So I think actually most of the demonstrators taking part in this march are more angry with the American administration than they are with Gordon Brown, and I think that's why they're going to be coming here shortly to protest outside the American embassy, which is just in front of me, to make their feelings known to the American administration that they want America and George Bush to do a lot more to get tough on carbon emissions.
No, America is one of the few countries in the world at the moment whose emissions are falling. Even though America's one of the few countries in the world at the moment whose emissions are falling.
Well, I think the problem with the American administration, as far as the campaigners are concerned, is that George Bush just doesn't seem interested in the climate change arguments. Until recently, he's been someone who's not been convinced at all that climate change is happening. He thinks that the solution to it is clean, green technologies rather than mandatory limits on carbon emissions. So the demonstrators here are very angry with the American administration and think that it's time that George Bush stopped talking about cutting carbon emissions and actually started doing something, got on board at Bali at the climate change conference and put pressure on governments in China and India to also cut their emissions.
The quickest way, of course, to cut our emissions would be to build some nuclear power stations. Have you seen any placards from the Green lobby there calling for more nuclear power?
Well, nuclear power is one of those hot potatoes, isn't it, if you'll pardon the expression. There are people who say that if carbon emissions are going to be cut, nuclear power stations are the solution. But obviously there are people here who are saying that what they'd like to see is Gordon Brown and the government to be concentrating on renewable energy sources instead of looking at nuclear power, which they say is going to get rid of one problem and create another problem. So what they're really hoping Gordon Brown is going to do is focus on renewable energy sources and look at cutting carbon emissions in that way rather than, as I say, getting rid of carbon emissions only to create another problem, and that's getting rid of nuclear waste.
James Kelly at the London climate change demonstration. First demonstrations are taking place across the UK to put pressure on politicians to take action on climate change. The London March has delivered a letter to Prime Minister Gordon Brown stressing the importance of strong environmental legislation. Kendra Okonski is in charge of environmental policy for the think tank International Policy Network, and she's here with me now. What's your position on this? Is cutting greenhouse gas emissions a cost-effective way of affecting the climate?
I believe that it won't be, that cutting greenhouse gas emissions won't be an effective way of dealing with climate change. Essentially, the problems that are alleged to be caused by climate change, many of them already exist today. And the main reason that people suffer or die because of them, say dirty water or weather events like the cyclone in Bangladesh a few weeks ago, it's because of poverty, not because we're putting emissions into the atmosphere.
Because Nicholas Stern didn't take this view, did he? He said it would be value for money, effectively, the measures needed if we act now.
Well, that's certainly his opinion, but many economists who looked at that work suggested that what would happen if we start cutting greenhouse gas emissions, such as with measures such as the Kyoto Protocol, is that it will basically be all cost and no benefit. That is, it will delay climate change by a few years late in the 21st century, but it will do nothing to solve the problems that might be related to climate change, malaria or water scarcity.
So essentially yours is the Bjorn Lomborg position, that the trillions that it would spend to achieve these targets, which may not change the climate more than a fraction of a degree, could be better spent alleviating poverty, giving people clean drinking water, eradicating disease,
absolutely.
AIDS.
I mean, what happens today is 10 million people die every year from communicable diseases and other causes. But the demonstrators today in London aren't demonstrating against all the millions of people that die from diarrhea. That's just not sexy. And so I think that we need to look at the most cost-effective ways to deal with climate change, which are addressing those problems themselves, rather than trying to change the climate in order to address those problems.
The president of the Czech Republic, President Klaus, who's in a minority internationally, said that different levels of development, income and wealth in different places of the world make worldwide overall and universal solutions costly, unfair and to a great extent discriminatory. The already developed countries do not have the right to impose any additional burden on the less developed countries. Would you agree with that?
I can't agree more with him. I mean, if you look at what happened a few weeks ago in Bangladesh, the cyclone hit. It's essentially like a hurricane. Thousands of people died, hundreds of thousands lost their homes and their livelihoods. But when a hurricane hits the U.S. state of Florida, maybe a few people die, a few people lose their homes, but people in Florida own their property. They can purchase insurance, whereas people in Bangladesh cannot. And foreign aid poured into Bangladesh, billions and billions of dollars, hasn't helped those people. It might have helped a few, of the elite politicians, their bank accounts, but hasn't helped the poor. So the real solution is to look at what is the cause of poverty in poor countries and why that continues, and it's a lack of institutions like property rights
and not lock them into it by denying them cheap electricity.
Absolutely. I think that inexpensive energy is one of the things that people need, and it needs to be inexpensive, modern, reliable, not cow dung, which is used by many people in Southern Asia.
Kendra, thank you very much for coming in. Kendra Okonski.
A protest is underway in central London as part of a global demonstration against climate change. Protests are taking place in more than 50 cities around the world, calling on governments to introduce tougher laws to combat global warming. Well, it comes as the United Nations climate talks in Bali are about to enter their second week.
The day marks the end of the first week of the UN Climate Change Conference in Bali. The two-week conference is being attended by thousands of delegates from almost 200 nations, and they're seeking progress towards a Kyoto II deal, a new global climate treaty. Fiona Wurge reports.
Wet and windy weather did little to dampen the enthusiasm of demonstrators who took to the streets in Europe in an attempt to press world leaders to act over climate change. Thousands of protesters marched through the streets of central London despite a steady drizzle. Thousands more gathered in Berlin, with smaller demonstrations around Germany and in several other European countries. The demonstrations rolled around the world, starting earlier in the day in East Asia. They were planned to coincide with the halfway mark of the two-week climate change conference taking place in Bali. In Taiwan, 1,500 people marched, some rolling a globe along the street, others wearing carbon emission signs. In the Philippines, hundreds more dressed up as renewable sources of energy like windmills and solar panels, and others dressed as clocks, symbols of a countdown to what they see as irreversible damage to the world's climate. All this is a show for the delegates from more than 180 countries meeting in Bali, there to discuss how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions after the current Kyoto Protocol targets expire in 2012. At the moment, there's no agreement on how to replace it. Key to any deal is the United States, which has so far refused to sign up to Kyoto. although some think a way around opposition from Washington is being found.
The other approach would be independent of what the US administration does. Several states in the US and several other entities over there decide to take action on their own, and the sum total of that would amount to a commitment, you could say, equivalent to a national commitment.
There's no doubt a renewed global deal will be harder to reach without the help of the United States. But these demonstrators are hoping there's enough goodwill at Bali to at least set a deadline for the beginning of talks on a new agreement. Fiona Wirge, BBC News.